I was just a few steps away from my diploma. 4 years of college, I survived it all. Not thanks to anyone, but through endless night shifts at the town cafe, weeks of instant noodles, and silent parent-teacher meetings where no family member ever showed up. I had thought today's ceremony would be a fitting end to all those sacrifices, until she stood up. My mother's voice, Helen Carter, tore through the solemn atmosphere of the auditorium. "She cheated to graduate," she screamed. "She slept with Principal Henderson to pass her courses. She's a fraud." The applause died out. Cameras, phones, eyes all turned towards me. I stood frozen on stage, the diploma still not in my hands. My head buzzed, blood congealed in my chest. I clearly heard my mother yell, "Ask her about the Miller family inheritance. Ask about the hospital years ago. She doesn't deserve to be standing here." A part of me wanted to scream back, but I didn't understand what she was talking about. The hospital? The inheritance? Below, I saw Lila, my best friend since middle school, her mouth agape in shock. Her eyes were fixed on me, as if to say, "Don't give up." But I couldn't move my feet. Principal Henderson stepped forward, his voice deep and clear through the microphone. "Mrs. Carter, please leave the hall." Security guards moved towards the rows of seats, but Helen refused to let go. She laughed loudly, waving her hand like a stage actress. "The whole town will know the truth. Don't think you can hide it forever." I took the diploma from the principal's hand. His hand gently squeezed my shoulder, his eyes full of concern. I tried to smile, but my throat was constricted. After the graduation ceremony, social media exploded. Rumors spread like wildfire. People called me fake, a treacherous child, Helen Carter's deceptive daughter. I locked my phone. I locked myself in my dorm room for 3 days, the diploma still in its envelope, lying on my desk like an irony. Why did she do that? Why that day? I didn't cry. I just sat silently, repeating the questions in my head. Which hospital? What inheritance? What is my mother hiding? Lila was the first to dare to enter my silence. She came, bringing muffins and understanding eyes. "She's not crazy, Sarah," Lila said. "I think she's scared of something, and I think she just let slip too much." I looked at Lila for a long time. That was the first moment I realized I might know nothing about the woman who raised me. And maybe I had never truly known who I was. I had never thought I would search my mother's room. But after that graduation ceremony, with every accusation still echoing in my head, I walked into Helen's room like a thief, my heart pounding erratically, my hands shaking so much I almost dropped the bedside lamp. I didn't know what I was looking for. I just knew something had been wrong for a very long time. I opened every drawer, every dusty old jewelry box, until I found it a small wooden box, its lock rusty, hidden under the bottom blanket in the wardrobe. The way it was hidden immediately told me. What was inside was not meant for anyone but Helen. I used scissors to pry open the lock. Inside the box were a stack of handwritten letters, a few old savings passbooks, and a pale yellow letter with trembling handwriting. "My dearest Sarah, this is the education fund your grandfather set aside specifically for you, $200,000. Use it to build your future, no matter what anyone tells you. Love, Grandfather, George." I read the words over and over until my hands went numb. The name Helen was not mentioned at all. Not a word about the mother who raised me. Just me and my grandfather. A few days later, during a tense argument, I decided to confront Helen. I threw the letter on the table and asked directly, "Where is this money? And what is the Miller family inheritance you screamed about at graduation?" She looked at me, not angry, not defiant as usual, but as if she had been hit in a raw nerve. For a second, I was scared. "You're exactly like Clara. Always demanding things that don't belong to you. Clara." The name fell like a sharp cut. I clenched my fists. "What are you saying? Who is Clara?" Helen jumped up. I misspoke. "Just pretend I'm crazy. Don't overthink it." But it was too late. I saw the panic in her eyes, and I knew I had touched a forbidden subject. That evening, I called Lila, my voice trembling. "I think my mother isn't my biological mother." We discussed how to find out Clara's identity. Lila introduced me to a private investigator named Frank Morrison, a former police officer specializing in financial fraud and identity cases. I paid him all the money left in my account. I had nothing left to lose. Frank didn't take long. The next week, he brought a stack of documents, his eyes stern. Clara Miller, 27, was Helen's older sister. In 2008, Clara died at Willow Creek Hospital after an unexplained medical accident. Helen then adopted Sarah without going through the official adoption system. The $200,000 education fund was left to Sarah in the will of George Miller, Clara, and Helen's father. The entire amount had been withdrawn over the past 3 years through forged power of attorney documents and transfers to a secret account in Helen's name. I was stunned. I couldn't breathe. Frank handed me an audio recording of a phone call between Helen and the bank, where she sweetly impersonated me to confirm the money transfer. I am Sarah Miller, born the 14th of October, 2007. I saw my own name defiled. Trust, childhood, identity, all stolen without my knowledge. I started recording every argument. One night, Helen screamed, "You think you deserve the old man's money, huh? I raised you, fed you. What more do you want? You're just like your mother, a leech," I cried silently. Not because of the words, but because I realized Helen had never loved me. To her, I was just living proof of a sin too great to bury. Frank called back at the end of the week. His voice was low and cold. "I just checked Helen's call log. For the past 6 months, she's been receiving continuous anonymous calls. The content is always the same. I know what you did with Sarah's fund. Give it back, or you'll lose everything." Helen thought I was behind it. She panicked, and in her fear of being exposed, she personally shattered the mask she had worn for 18 years. Right at my graduation ceremony. I once thought a legal battle would make me feel strong. But as I held the lawsuit against Helen, the woman who had called me daughter for 18 years, my hands didn't shake from fear, but because my heart was being torn in two, one half filled with extreme anger, the other still naively searching for a reason to forgive. I had hoped Helen had just made a mistake, that she spent the money out of worry for me, that all the malicious words, the psychological blows, the evenings I was left hungry, could all be called strict upbringing. But then Frank sent me a stack of documents printed on thick white paper, neatly organized, chillingly. The title on the cover: Transaction Summary, Sarah Miller Education Fund, True Account Holder, Helen Carter. The first transaction was in my freshman year. $15,000 transferred to a car dealership in Portland. 3 days later, I remembered eating instant noodles all week because I didn't have enough money for a biology textbook. I looked at those cold numbers and clearly saw my childhood silently slipping away. Every stolen dollar was a slap to the self-esteem I had struggled to build. And then there was Tommy. I had never talked to my brother about money. Helen always made the distinction clear between us. I was the ungrateful one, while Tommy was her last hope. But I couldn't let my brother continue to live in the sweet glass cage Helen had built. That evening, I met Tommy at the park after school. He sat on the old wooden bench, his shoulders thinner than I remembered. "I have something," I said, handing him my phone with the recording of Helen yelling, her voice bitter as thorns. "All of you are useless. I raised 2 of you like parasites. I should have been the heir, not Clara. Not you, Sarah. No one." Tommy listened without blinking. When the recording ended, he was silent for a long time. He choked. "She once slapped me. When I asked about college money, she said, I was a traitor, like you." For the first time, I saw Tommy's tears fall, and it was also the first time he held my hand. "I'll testify," Tommy said, his voice still shaking. "If you dare to stand up, then I must too." I squeezed my brother's hand, a strange emotion swelling in my heart, not gloating, but regret. Because only now were we truly siblings. On the day I filed the lawsuit, I stood in front of lawyer Margaret Chen's office, clutching the stack of documents Frank had investigated for the past 2 months. I had thought I would feel relieved. Instead, I felt like I was walking out of a funeral of the very concept of family within me. "I want to sue," I said, my voice not shaking, but also not confident. "For fraud, forgery, defamation, and prolonged financial abuse. Margaret didn't ask again. She just nodded and opened the file. The lawsuit spread faster than I expected. Willow Creek was a small town, and people couldn't resist gossiping about that Sarah girl suing her own mother to steal property. I walked into the grocery store, people stopped talking. I walked past the library, silent eyes followed me like ghosts. Helen, as expected, also started fighting back. She sent handwritten letters to neighbors, complaining that she was the victim of a child, brainwashed by bad friends and a detective who invents stories. I didn't bother to read it all. I didn't bother to justify myself. The truth doesn't need to be screamed, it needs to be revealed at the right time. The preliminary hearing arrived on a suffocating August morning. I wore a white shirt, no makeup. I wasn't there to perform. I was there to end it. In court, Margaret played the recording of Helen mocking me, cursing Tommy, and admitting to withdrawing the money before she found out. Frank presented evidence of forged signatures, altered bank statements, and the testimony of a bank employee confirming Helen had used fake identification to withdraw money in my name. Helen burst into tears. "That girl is fabricating things! I just wanted to teach her a lesson because she was so spoiled." Her voice echoed like a desperate death rattle, but no one believed her anymore. I saw it clearly in the judge's eyes, in Tommy's eyes sitting in the back row, and in that moment, I understood something. The truth, even if it comes late, still carries its own weight. The court opened at 8 a.m. I arrived an hour early, sitting in my car with a cold coffee and sweating palms. I stared at the courthouse entrance where today would serve as a dissection room for what people once called motherly love. Margaret got out of her car, adjusted her blazer, and gave a slight nod. "We're not here for revenge, Sarah. We're here for closure." I nodded, but my throat was constricted. I had thought today would be the day I found justice, but all I felt was exhaustion. When I entered the courtroom, I saw Helen already sitting at the opposite table. Her shirt was ash gray, not the expensive silk she preferred. Her hair was disheveled. Her eyes had greenish-gray circles. She didn't look at me. For the first time in my life, I saw her. Shrunken. No longer the powerful woman who always dominated every room. She resembled a shadow, shattered, distorted, and hollow. Tommy sat right behind me. He held my hand. I felt his trembling, just as I had trembled in my dorm room 4 years ago, when I discovered my bank account balance was only $14. "You can do it, sis," he whispered. Judge Reeves entered. A silver-haired woman, her voice sharp but not cold. "We are here today to hear the case of Anderson v. Anderson. Both parties have submitted all evidence. Witness testimony will now begin." Margaret called Dr. Patricia Hammond a handwriting expert. She walked up, carrying a thick file. Her voice was steady, clear, unemotional, like a precise scalpel. I analyzed 40 documents signed Sarah Miller over 3 years. 37 of them were not signed by her. There were signs of mechanical copying, unnatural pen lifts. I also found many draft papers with Sarah's signature found in the defendant's desk drawer. Helen bowed her head. I no longer saw resistance, only silence. Margaret continued. "We have financial evidence. Over $200,000 transferred from the education fund in Sarah's name to a secret account belonging to the defendant. We also have expenditure statements, a Lexus purchase, a sapphire necklace, a Palm Springs getaway, a casino in Portland. I didn't hear the details anymore. My heart beat slowly, one beat at a time, as if trying to hold on to reality. Each of those luxuries was linked to a night I cried because I couldn't afford textbooks, a week I washed dishes 3 shifts just to pay rent. Helen's lawyer tried to argue. She was just managing her daughter's assets. Sarah is the ungrateful one. The judge looked at Helen. "Do you have power of attorney?" Helen was silent, for a long time. Finally, she opened her mouth, her voice hoarse, like a relic. "I just wanted to teach her a lesson. She didn't appreciate." "Me." Reeves cut her off. "You lost the right to teach when you started stealing." The verdict was delivered after an hour of deliberation. Judge Reeves returned, holding the final file. The court concludes that the defendant, Helen Carter, committed signature forgery, embezzlement of an education fund, and caused severe emotional and reputational harm to the plaintiff. The total amount accused of misappropriation is $200,000, along with $100,000 in emotional damages. The defendant is obligated to repay the entire amount, plus interest and legal fees, totaling $300,000. I heard it as if the verdict was for someone else. Not me. Not the girl who used to curl up in her dorm room, afraid of being expelled for not being able to pay tuition. The judge wasn't finished. Due to systematic fraudulent behavior, the court also refers the entire case file to the prosecutor's office for consideration of criminal prosecution on charges of fraud and forgery of legal documents. The gavel struck, sharp, decisive. Helen, the woman who once stood in an auditorium of hundreds to humiliate me, was now just a shadow collapsing into her seat, burying her face in her hands, sobbing silently. I turned away. Outside the courthouse, the wind blew strongly. My shirt clung to me, but I didn't feel cold. Tommy stood beside me, silent. Margaret came out last, holding the file, and patted my shoulder gently. Well done, Sarah. I didn't know if it was praise or comfort. Perhaps both. I looked up at the gray sky of Willow Creek. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid to think about tomorrow. I was no longer the deceived child. I was a survivor. 3 weeks after the final hearing, I started to sleep again. But the dreams didn't soften. In my dreams, I still saw Helen standing in the middle of my graduation, screaming under the stage lights. She's not the child I chose. She's a living reminder. I woke up in the middle of the night, cold sweat on my forehead. I thought it was all over. But clearly, that was just the first floor of a decaying multi-story house. The questions remained unanswered. What was the hospital from years ago? Why did Helen mention the Miller family inheritance? Who was Clara really? And why did she die when I was just 1 year old? I couldn't live with that void. I started going through all the data from the lawsuit documents, files, call logs, scattered messages. And then I stopped at one detail that I had once overlooked. In the list of threatening calls to Helen before the trial, there was a strange number repeated many times, identity hidden, but registered under an organization's name. Willow High School, the school I attended. Also, where Principal Henderson worked. I went to see him that afternoon, without an appointment. The principal's office door was still the same. The nameplate, James Henderson, neatly affixed under the brass doorknob. He invited me in. The room was strangely quiet. I didn't beat around the bush. Was it you who called and threatened Helen for the past 6 months? A moment of silence. Then he nodded. Yes, it was me. I stood up abruptly. Why? How are you involved in this? He slowly took out a cream-colored envelope and placed it on the table. Sarah, I am your biological father. I thought I misheard. The room seemed to distort in my eyes, everything blurred, except for that sentence. I am your biological father. He opened the envelope. Inside was a DNA test result, a comparison sample from a public health screening I had participated in at school last year. It was something I had forgotten immediately after leaving the medical office, but for him, it was confirmation of 17 years of stifled suspicion in his heart. Your mother and I, Clara, were ex-lovers. In 2007, she told me she was pregnant. I was going to propose to her. His voice choked. But the day after that, she disappeared. I remembered Helen had said my mother died in an unfortunate medical accident, but she never mentioned my father. I searched everywhere. Finally, I heard that Clara died at Willow Creek Hospital, only recorded as an accidental drug reaction. No one suspected anything, because someone said she had a history of severe allergies. Henderson looked at me, his eyes wet, but not weak. I didn't believe it, and I investigated. But there was no proof. I only knew one thing. Helen was the last person to see Clara. She was the one who admitted Clara to the hospital that day. And after her death, she suddenly adopted you without any official procedures. I felt like I couldn't breathe anymore. Everything began to collapse. It was me who called and threatened Helen. I thought if I cornered her, she would expose herself. But I didn't expect to drive her crazy at your graduation. He bowed his head. I'm sorry. For everything. I didn't answer immediately. I just looked at him, a man who had been silent for 2 decades, living beside me without daring to step forward, because he was scared, because he had no proof. because Helen had taken both my mother and my childhood. That evening, I sought out Dr. Margaret Evans, who was on duty during the fateful shift the night Clara died. After much hesitation, she agreed to meet me. I remember Helen coming to the hospital with her sister. Clara seemed tired, but lucid. Helen insisted on staying alone in the room with the patient, saying it was private family matters. An hour later, the alarm rang. Clara had stopped breathing. The conclusion was anaphylactic shock. I asked, "At that time, was there any medicine bottle in the room?" She nodded. I saw Helen carrying a small, privately labeled bottle of medicine. When I asked, she said it was personal allergy medication. My entire body went cold. That was the night Helen killed my mother. On the way home, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my phone. I didn't write in my diary. I just sat alone in the living room, hugging the small dog Tommy named Lucky, and quietly listened to my heartbeat. Each beat, slowly, resilient, alive, and sober enough to know I was about to face Helen one last time, not as her daughter, but as Clara's daughter. I had never been to Oregon State Prison, never imagined the day I would have to stand before a cold glass pane, facing the woman who raised me and who also killed my biological mother. Helen was brought into the visiting room in handcuffs, a wrinkled gray prison uniform, her hair disheveled. No longer the powerful look, no longer the cold pride that once made me shrink as a child. She sat down, facing me through the thick glass. Her eyes were swollen, but still held a familiar spark of contempt. I didn't greet her, didn't ask how she was. I just looked straight at her and said, I know you poisoned Clara. I know you stole the will, drained the inheritance fund, and adopted me to cover up your crime." Helen didn't answer immediately. Her lips were tightly pressed, trembling. Then she burst out laughing, a dry, distorted laugh, as if someone had crushed her lungs from the inside. "That old man told you, didn't he? James Henderson. It's always him." I remained silent. Clara was always better than me. Do you know how I lived? When I was little, my parents gave all their tuition money to her, bought her a piano, hired private teachers, and me? I learned from old books, wore her hand-me-down clothes, and when I won my first scholarship, my father just said, "Clara got an honorary scholarship too." Her voice cracked. Then you appeared. The perfect daughter, Clara's eyes, Henderson's mouth, and every day I had to see you in my house, calling me mother. Mother! I clenched my hands, my voice still steady. "And so, you poisoned your own sister?" "I didn't intend to kill her," Helen screamed. "I just wanted her to lose everything. Lose James, lose money, lose her reputation. I just wanted to cut the string that tied me to her shadow." That sentence fell like a bone-deep cut. Helen sobbed, her breathing heavy. "I raised you, Sarah. I raised you. I fed you, clothed you. You raised me with my mother's blood money," I interrupted. "With false memories, with control and suppression. You didn't raise me out of love. You raised me to soothe your conscience." Helen fell silent. For the first time, her eyes wandered as if there was no longer any logic to cling to. I placed a photo on the table, a picture of me with my newly adopted dog, and the first row of shops I built from the compensation she was forced to pay. I'm still alive. I'm still growing up. And I will continue to live without you. Without Clara's blood, without Helen Carter's memories. Helen trembled. She reached out to the glass, as if to hold on. But I didn't reach back. "Sarah, you can't hate me forever. I don't hate you. I just stopped loving you. And I don't need you to call me daughter anymore." I stood up, slowly. "Goodbye, Helen." That evening, Tommy and I sat on the porch, gazing at the rose bushes I had just planted exactly like the rose bushes Clara had planted in an old photo. "You know," I said, "for 18 years, I was afraid I would become Helen. Angry, bitter, lonely." Tommy leaned his head on my shoulder. "But you're not like her. You never were." I looked at the blooming roses, the golden light illuminating their petals like fire in the night. I didn't know if justice was enough. I didn't know if Clara would forgive me for living in her killer's house for all those years. But I knew one thing for sure. I would not let my mother's death be a silent ending. 6 years passed. The town of Willow Creek was no longer the same. This summer, the maple tree in front of the library had grown taller, Mr. Quard. Amos's old bookstore was replaced by a herbal tea shop, and the jade green sign of Clara's garden hung quietly on the main street like a whisper. Every pane can blossom. My chain of organic food stores, Clara's Garden, now had 8 branches across Oregon. But I still kept the first store in this town, where I planted a small garden behind the house with the same flowers my mother loved: white daisies, lavender, and velvet red rose bushes. Every morning, I brewed tea for customers, personally writing messages on the paper bags. Be kind to yourself. You're on the right path. Once, a young girl came to the store, her eyes wary, holding a discount coupon. She whispered, "I heard. The owner of this store once won a big lawsuit and used the money to start over. Is it true?" I just smiled. People say many things, but what matters is what you believe in. James Henderson, my father, still worked as the principal at Willow High, but he had reduced his workload, spending more time counseling students. Every month, he came to the store, sat in a quiet corner, read books, and helped me check orders. I used to be afraid I couldn't call him father, but on my 24th birthday, he gave me a letter, a handwritten copy of old letters Clara had written but never sent. "My dearest Sarah, even though I cannot be with you, I hope you grow up knowing that no one has the right to define you by your pain. Everyone has the right to choose family again, choose love again, and choose themselves again." I burst into tears. That was the first time I called him Dad. Tommy, now in his final year of college, studying business administration in Seattle, called me every week. He talked about his first girlfriend, about a difficult marketing class, and about missing home even though the home he referred to was where I lived. "When I graduate, I'll come back to Willow Creek," he said. "You need someone to manage the chain of stores, right?" I smiled. "I need a brother first." One late autumn afternoon, I went to the cemetery north of town, carrying a bouquet of white daisies and a cup of rose tea. Clara's grave was very simple, a white stone carved with Clara Miller, 1980-2008. A short life, a love that does not disappear. I sat down, placing my hand on the cold stone. "Mom, I've gotten justice for you. I found my father, and I also found myself." I poured the tea, took a sip, and closed my eyes. No more anger, no more fear, only gratitude. I stood up, brushed off my dress, and walked out of the cemetery. Outside the gate, Lila was waiting for me, holding a basket of freshly baked muffins. She was still the same strong eyes, practical voice, but a heart as soft as a fresh croissant. We walked together, hand in hand. I looked back one last time, as if bidding farewell not just to my mother, but to the old Sarah, the girl who once only knew how to silently swallow tears, who once considered kindness a weakness, and who once believed she owed gratitude to someone who killed her own mother. Today's Sarah knew that she was not a product of the past, but the one who rewrote her own ending. The inheritance I received was not money, but resilience, integrity, and freedom from lies. I will protect it for the rest of my life.